joined by the incredible Allan Ball. We are here on Are You OK Day. It's Australia's National Day of Action to remind Aussies that every day is the day to ask, are you okay? It's about starting meaningful conversations whenever you spot the signs that someone you care about or someone you know in your life might be struggling. I just want to spend a little bit of time now introducing the incredible Allan. For those of you who do not know him, Allan believes authentic community, stakeholder, and third-party engagement can help Australians better understand the challenges of violence towards women and how to best engage men and boys in the process of cultural change. He has previously worked for the National Disability Insurance Agency as the National Director Rural and Remote, Director South Australia and NT Community Engagement, and at SA Health as a Director of Consumer and Community Engagement. During his formative years, he also worked as a mental health clinician in forensic child and adolescent health services, local government, and in not-for-profit organisations. Over the last decade, Allan has gained invaluable experience in frontline service delivery to assist women and children experiencing domestic and family violence. He has also led executive management in health and government environments to support the voice of people with lived experience. So it is my absolute pleasure to be sitting here with someone with the experience that you have, Allan, the heart that you have. And one of the things that I love talking to you about is that you're one of us. When I say you're one of us, you have real compassion and feelings of bringing people together and starting to address some of those very difficult topics. And today we're talking about, are you okay? How to have those hard conversations. Most of us in our lives, we want to support the people around us, but often we don't know how. So today we'll just talk about some of the things that you can do if you're recognizing someone's stressed in life, what the message of Are You Okay is all about. So I want to start with that, Allan. What is Are You Okay Day for you? What do you see as being the big message that we want to be talking about?
Well, good morning, everybody. And can I just first shout out and just pay my respects to Wunjak Noongar people, because I am on the glorious lands of Perth this morning, and I wanted to pay my respects to elders past and present, but also extend that to elders right across Australia as well. Are you okay? It's such a critical conversation, right, Fiona? And what I love about the theme this year, I don't know if it is the theme, so I don't work for Are You Okay, but I'm taking it is their theme, is that no qualifications are needed. And I love that concept around no qualifications are needed, because when did we overthink the conversations around connecting as human beings? We're social creatures. And as social creatures, our currency, our connection comes through communication and talking, non-verbally and verbally. We say so much, and we need to also be there to hold. So the call to action for Are You Okay genuinely looks at asking a question that matters, right? But it's not just about words that come out of your mouth. It's about the way that you convey that and hold space, hold time, talk, or be open to also hearing maybe something that might not be comfortable, and listening with empathy. And then it's about that encouraging of action too in that conversation as well. And encouraging action could just be holding in that moment. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to be a clinician and respond with the most amazing therapeutic model and get it right. But also just making sure that you believe those conversations with that kind of notion of check-in. So the theme this year, I think, no qualifications needed. There's more to it. And I think I would love to unpack that further today. But really, I love the fact that we're doing it. And I should probably ask you a question, Fiona. Are you okay?
Oh, Allan, thank you for asking. I am more than okay, because I'm sitting here and with you, and I'm surrounded by people who do check in on me. And I guess that's the power of being asked those questions. In my life, what I find is that people really are aware of the people around them more and more. I think over the last 2 years, over this pandemic time, we've often felt quite disconnected from others. And that is part of the issue, isn't it? As we're heading into 2022, more and more I hear people say, I feel a little more isolated than I used to. I don't feel like I'm as connected as I used to be. Or I'm worried about my kids, or I'm worried about the people I work with as a leader of organizations who perhaps want to check in on the people that they work with, but they don't know how. Because one of the fears that we have as human beings is that we might put our foot in it, or that we might make things worse. As we talk a little more, I've got the chat open. So we are really open, Allan and I, to your questions. So please pop them into the chat. We will leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end to address questions, but I will also be checking the chat as we go, because I know everyone has things that may be a burning question for you right now. And you know what? We love a question. So one of the things that I often get asked, Allan, is what am I looking for? You know, checking in, when should I check in? But how would I know if someone was perhaps struggling? What are the things that I might be looking for? So in my world, what I often say is you're looking for change often. Like in my house, I have a taciturn, very quiet engineer who I'm married to, and he says about 12 words a day. If he's got 13, he's done. He needs to have a little nap because he's done for the day. Now, if he comes home from work and he doesn't really say very much, he just sits in his chair and he might flick on the telly or open his book or go for a walk. I am not worried at all, because I've been married to this man for a very long time. That is him. That is who he is. But if my younger kid, and this has happened in the past, if she arrives home and she doesn't say, hey, mom, and start to tell me about her day, if she wanders off and she's not really expansive, if she goes into a room and shuts the door and over dinner she's quiet, I know there's something up, because it's a change for her. I know that if she is, it might be nothing, but I'm going to check in because I'm seeing a change. And when we're talking about change, it's it could be change in body. You know, if you've got a child at home who's suddenly starting to sleep less, or people are complaining of aching muscles, because when you're under stress, what happens with the fight or flight response is you're often tense, right? And so that could be a sign. Or people have got tension headaches. So changes in body. It could be changes in feelings. People expressing sadness, or they're not quite as up. And often I think we think of people not being okay as they might be sad, but sometimes it's just that they're not regulating their emotion. They might be angrier, they might be just, they might be snappier, or they might be quieter. So we see some interesting differences in feelings. And it could be changes in behavior. If it's in a work situation, someone who used to be very prompt at work, harder to tell in the pandemic, but people are late when they're actually usually early people. Some changes in behavior where they become withdrawn, or when they used to be expansive, as I said. It's those changes. Is this unusual for that person? And then changes in thoughts. Those thoughts of people are expressing hopelessness, helplessness, but it might not even be there. It just might be feeling a little more cynical. They might not be themselves. So that's what I say. So do you agree with that, Allan? Is that the kinds of things that we're talking about? We're thinking about what we're looking for?
Our absolute subconscious contains really powerful mechanisms which allow us to create distance at times, particularly from adversity or uncomfortable events. And so you're right, we need to look for those signs, those very subtle signs in changes of behaviors. And so the people that are online today on the podcast and also watching through social media, you would have that moment yourself. So it does start with self-awareness around, well, what goes on for you when you're feeling like you're not in control, or something is going not to plan, or that you're having one of those moments where you feel like, okay, I need to take a break now. And as human beings, and I think as society, when did we become comfortable with the notion that feelings of sadness or frustration are kind of bad? Because feelings are all normal. They're the whole eclectic range of our feelings. They come, they visit us, they stay for longer. I mean, I know over the weekend I was visited by feelings of anxiety, and those feelings lasted a little bit longer. And it's when those feelings are there a little bit longer that I need those people to check in, because they start to see those signs of distress. So sleeping too much or not going to the gym is something that if people notice that for me, they know, oh gosh, something's up, changes in those behaviors. Relying heavily on distraction as well. Like, sorry, I know that when I'm feeling anxious, I'll go look at the phone a lot more, and I'll be scrolling through the TikTok because I'm a mad fan of TikTok at the moment. I don't know why. But there are those really subtle forms of changes in behavior. But then there is also silence. And there's also feelings of catastrophe. And sometimes people change so little, but that doesn't mean that what's going on for them doesn't mean that there's something really serious there. And I think about the women that I've worked with previously who have experienced some form of domestic violence, particularly psychological violence. And the changes in behavior are so subtle that it really takes an acute lens to really look at what's going on, and to think about actually there could be something else going on there for that person, and how do I respond? Because not every situation that we are facing is going to conjure up that same emotional sense. So anxiety might look a little bit different on a roller coaster as it does if you're experiencing a dog in a front yard that's barking at you. Like, similar responses, but they're different setting events, which require have a different impact on us depending on childhood experiences, our state of mind at the time, other antecedents like what we've eaten, how much we've slept, or what else is going on for us. So we got to get comfortable with the notion that there are multiple emotions, and we also got to get comfortable in connecting with each other more.
I love that, because the first thing that you said was, emotions are normal. And we've spent a lot of time, I think, over the last few years, almost demonizing emotions. I think that partly it is to try and we want people to be aware of the fact that sometimes we're jumping off cliffs, not jumping off, but we're falling off cliffs, because we don't want to be dealing with people who are extremely distressed. And so, yes, we do need to be aware of that when people have experiencing sustained sadness or sustained periods of anger, that could be indicative of something bigger. But the reality is that it is very normal to have times when you feel sad, angry, and particularly if you're going through periods of grief. And human beings go through grief because stuff happens to us. So it doesn't mean if you're feeling upset or upset for a long period, if you're experiencing grief, that means that there is something wrong, because actually this is a normal response. It is normal to feel frustration. I like that you said that, because one of the things is that's partly the reason that we might hide some of those things, is that we've made it so that's not a normal part of life. One of the things that we like to do at Groove is get people to do what's called a mood check. How are you feeling right now? It's from a sort of scale of feeling bad to feeling really good. And the reason I like that is understanding that mood is transitory. And that means that over the course of a day, you can have a moment where you feel really cross. I don't know about you, when we're at dinner time, when everything's coming at you and you've got people asking you questions, I'm feeling bad, but you know what? In 2 hours' time, I'm feeling okay. And so understanding that actually over the course of a day, we might feel angry, frustrated, happy, joy because that coffee was delicious, that it's actually normal to have a range of emotions. What becomes a problem when it starts to become sustained. So let's not demonize emotions. Emotions are normal, but understanding that there will be times when if you're feeling more sad than you are happy, if you're not sleeping over a sustained period of time, these could be signs of something else. And the reality is that we don't know what's going on in people's lives. So we get a snapshot. When we meet somebody, we've got a feeling, it might be a friend we're checking in with, we just get a gut feeling. The thing about are you okay and checking in is even if nothing's going on, it's still a lovely thing to do. That's why I love it. It doesn't mean to say that even if you're asking if someone's okay, it doesn't mean that you're saying that they're not okay. It's like, I care enough about you to check in. So we've got a question here, and as we'll go on about how to check in a way that feels safe and good and give you some structure around there. But we're being asked, what are some ways you can connect or support the wellbeing of staff with a shift to working from home? So that's within the context of work. Have you got some tips there, Allan?
Yeah, and thank you. First of all, thank you for the question. And I just wanted to respond to something you said first, if I can indulge a little bit.
Of course.
Because I know that Groove, I'm a real big fan of Groove. So I've also done my daily action, so my dot. So I'm making sure that I do that. And one of my dot today was to ensure that I took some time for self. And we need to be selfish. We need to get comfortable with that selfishness, because the self is so important. We've heard it all before, putting the oxygen mask on ourselves before we can help others, so important. But actually, what are we doing for self? So I want to embrace the hashtag selfish self or something like that is okay, because I made sure that today I took time to have my decaf oat latte, and I took 5 minutes in the gorgeous Perth blue skies and Wudjak Noongar country, and I just said, thank you. Thank you just for being today and having this coffee. And I was just in that moment. So that was really critical. So I just wanted to highlight that because I did my dot today. But with regards to the question about wellness at work, it starts with how connected are we with our people? How connected are we with the people that we work with? And it shouldn't matter if we're online or if we've got in-office environments. Fundamentally, that answer to that question is critical. I lead a virtual team, a national team. I have a team right across Australia. I've seen staff members maybe once in person all year. I've seen them multiple times online, but I know how they're going. And it's about creating an operating rhythm that works for your team. And when I say an operating rhythm, that needs to take a multi-perspective approach. So it needs to look at the balance between responsibility and accountability to the work, but responsibility and accountability to how we're managing that work. And it's really easy to think if we're working at home that out of sight, out of mind. It's a little bit more difficult to manage. And I get the challenges of that. I've been facing that in work environment for over 5 years with virtual teams. But fundamentally, my trick, my best tip, and this was given by, I don't know if anyone knows somatic therapy or Babette Rothschild, social worker out of the United States, but she talks about this notion around operating rhythm, particularly in the context of kind of work management. I asked her one day at a conference, it was in Sydney, she was wearing the most gorgeous green beret, and I was like, I need to rock a green beret like that. But alas, I asked her about what would you do? And she says operating rhythm and making a habit of it. So that's why on a Monday morning, I check in with my team, my senior leaders, and we start off with a temperature check. And a bit like what you said about your mood, it's about how you're going today. And you don't have to put context to it as well. I don't think we always have to be Alice in Wonderland and be curious to get to the bottom of it. Curiosity every day is really important, but curiosity is about checking in. And that one word check-in at the start of the week gives me a read. But when we know our people really well, and when then we start to marry that up against the signs, then we can start to respond accordingly. So a team might say, good. And I know that last week there was a deadline that wasn't met, or that something really exciting happened. So there's a bit of disjoint as well. So what we critically need to do then is we need to know our people really well. Then marry up that operating rhythm of wellness and well-being and to be really disciplined with it. So you can't just do it just once. You've got to repeatedly do it. And I think, oh my gosh, this is like first year philosophy here. I think Aristotle was saying we are, what did he say? We are what we do repeatedly.
Wow.
So yeah. So if we need to do something well, we are, and we know it works well, we need to do it repeatedly. And then it becomes that habit.
Yeah, I really love that. I wasn't familiar with that operating rhythm, but what I do think is that if it is integrated into the day and the ways of being, then it becomes the regular way, the normal way of doing things around here. And so checking in is fundamental. And I hear what you're saying, Andy, is that when we've got that shift from working at work, we see people all the time. We've got things that are naturally built into our day, like taking lunch, walking to the fridge. I do it. I'm back at work at the moment, so I'm walking to the fridge so often, and I'm passing people on the way. We have a way of seeing people. So what happens when they're not in the physical environment? And I like the idea of that temperature check now, which is we have done this with various organizations where they are at risk. They've got people who are operating heavy machinery, for instance, where we know that if people are not on it, then mistakes can be made. We're talking about accidents happen, or that could actually be catastrophic. So you want to actually keep on top of things, because what happens with accidents like that is when people are distracted, if they've got stuff going on at home, they can bring that in. Operating heavy machinery, mistakes can happen. In fact, often when we look at the root cause of accidents, it's often not about, it might be about distraction, but you're distracted because you're thinking about some stressful stuff or life events that are going on for you right now. So as managers and as leaders, it's good for us to know what's happening with our people. So one of the things that you can do with a reticent group of people who don't necessarily want to go and tell you everything that's going on in their lives is to ask on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being I'm feeling tip-top, and 5 being I'm feeling really under the pump and I need a conversation. And if you have that regular temperature check, it's just you walk in, you don't even have to give any context, which is right, Allan. You don't have to go, you know what, I'm a 5 because blah, blah, blah. You can go, I'm a 5 today. Now, 5 would mean I'm right under the pump and I actually need a conversation. And that gives the leader a way in to say, okay, I'll give you a call if they're not in the office, or I'll give you a call and we'll talk. And within that scale of 1 to 5, you can then get an idea of what you might need to do. What's great about it is that if in the rhythms of working, there isn't something odd that you're doing. It's something that this team is doing. And it's the same with the conversation of being able to check in, understanding that it's important as leaders that we do that. What we are asking, and often people will say fine when they're not fine, because that's what human beings do. So then it's the context of I'm fine, I'm great. But you start to notice little things. You might have someone within your team who's not, doesn't seem to be on it, is not meeting those deadlines. You just have to be more hyper vigilant, I think, about noticing what's going on with your people when they're not in the office. And for us, we've started a Slack channel. So using your comms channels where people, as a wellbeing company, I mean, it's hard. Even we find it hard sometimes, is that we're starting to get vulnerability. And what's beautiful about that is if one person is vulnerable, says, look, right now I've got some stuff going on. I don't want to talk about what it is. Other people give permission. So as leaders, we have to model it. So if we want to know what's going on with our people, we have to kind of share and be a little bit more vulnerable. And I think it is important when you're talking about dispersed workforces that we do that. Do you think that vulnerability is important as a leader, Allan?
It's cultural building. It is absolutely critical. It's one of the real hallmarks of a really high-performing team. The ability to kind of be with each other in any emotional state, being comfortable with the discomfort is a real sign that teams are functioning really well. And when we do vulnerability, we strip back all of that kind of constructions that we've put in as society, really, about how we're meant to be. And I think about stereotypes too. Traditionally, and we still know in Australian society that men particularly have a certain connotation that they can't be caring or nurturing, sweet or feminine. And those words or those connotations then in certain workplaces and industries are even more so heightened. And we need to embrace the notion of vulnerability. I think it's so critical. And humans are not cogs in a machine. We're not just a one size fits all. And it's not like when we walk into workplaces that suddenly you cross that line, whether or not that's working at home or, because today it's very unusual because I'm in an office today, which is very unusual. So I walk in a door, but it's not like once I walk in that door that everything else that was going on is suddenly switched off. And it sounds so simple, but it's such a radical notion around these check-ins. And we've got to be disciplined with it. We just got to be comfortable, and we've got to make it part of our vernacular. So if you're asking people about how was your weekend, or what was that great thing you watched on TV or watched on social media, let's replace that. Let's replace that with a check-in, a curious check-in. How are you going? That would be a really good thing in society if we can do that cultural building, because admittedly, if we do that, we start to change society and the way that we operate as a fabric. And maybe then well-being universally increases. I know that's very aspirational and kind of living in that world, but why not? Why don't we start with the check-in? Well, why can't we replace the how are you to what's your check-in rating today? I don't know.
Yeah, no, and we're trying to do that more and more, and people like it. And I think that they like it. They might be resistant in the beginning, but when it becomes what you talk about, operating rhythm, which I really like, if you can make it a part of operating rhythm, then it becomes less, awkward, and it's a way in. One of the questions that we've just been asked, and it's an interesting point, is how do we manage the tension between checking in and invading a person's privacy? And the truth is that when we're checking in, and we will give you a framework that we use at Groove, but when we're checking in, it doesn't mean that you need to know all the details. Sometimes it's just, are you okay? That whole thing, are you okay? What are you comfortable sharing? You might know, it depends on how well you know that person. Some people do. One of the things I'll say is that often people are reluctant to talk about what's going on for them because they're worried about burdening you. So I think that brings me to the framework. Let's bring the framework in that we use, and you can tell us what you use, Allan. We use a framework called CARE. You just have to remember CARE. And C is check-in. And the check-in is, how are you going? Are you okay? It could be, are you okay? I've noticed that just having a conversation starter is an important way in, because often these conversations are difficult for you, and often they can be hard for the person that you're checking in with. They might love that you've done it, but there can be an awkward moment. So having a conversation starter, a simple way in, is something that we would encourage. And that's why Are You Okay Day is so beautiful, because are you okay? Or how is it going? Or how are you doing? Or how are you traveling? Just some way in a fairly kind of gentle way. So the check-in is important. And then it's thinking about where you have that conversation. If you want to check in with somebody and you're imagining that something actually, there may be some disclosures, don't have it in the corridor. Have it somewhere where you won't be interrupted. Have it somewhere where that person might feel comfortable. Now, if you're a parent of a teenager, I do recommend the car. Now, Allan, you're not there yet with your 4-year-old, but at some point, cars are the most amazing places for parents to get to know, to check in with kids. Kids love, like if you're sitting here driving, it's something about you become invisible and they will be more open. If you're checking in with a friend, having a wander through the park and sitting on a park bench, there's some beautiful imagery around that, sitting with somebody, because that's genuinely what people often need, is someone to sit with them. So sitting so they don't have to face you, it's less confronting. If you can do it on a walk, take them outside, maybe it's in a cafe, but a place where that person would feel comfortable. So that's the check-in. The A is to actively listen. And there's a lot of talk about the fact that you should listen more than you speak, because from a neuroscience point of view, when people have an opportunity to talk about what's going on for them, an amazing thing happens to the limbic system. The amygdala, which is the stress that is responsible for our fight or flight response, it's our stress response. It's always on high alert, right? It's primed basically to put us in fight or flight. When we have unprocessed emotion, we stay in the limbic system in fight or flight. But if you start talking about what's going on for you, something incredible happens in the brain. We know from neuroimaging that the amygdala stands down. That's the part of the limbic system responsible for fight or flight. And the prefrontal cortex, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning part of the brain, which is responsible for emotional processing, lights up. So just by and that's the problem solving part of the brain. So just by talking about something, talking about your emotions, talking about what's going on for you, the brain starts to relax and starts to process that emotion, so you're not so stuck. So giving people the opportunity to speak about what's going on for them is an incredible gift. So the idea is that you are listening rather than talking. Because people, and you're listening without judgment, because the reason people don't talk to you or feel often worried is because they're concerned about being judged. And in a workplace, this might impact my career. So you have to be attentively listening without judgment, saying, be very intentional about that. This is not going to impact your job. I want to listen. And the reassure, which is check in, actively listen, reassure, is reassure that it's okay for you to talk to me. It's not a burden. Because very often the reason people don't want to disclose is because they don't want to burden you. And so just giving them that context to say, I'm okay to hear. And that's why the Are You Okay conversation can only happen if you are ready to hear the answers. If you're in a bad place and you're worried about somebody, ask someone else to have the conversation, because it might be too much for you, because we are taking on a lot right now. So make sure that you're ready to have the conversation. So reassure it's okay. And the last thing is to encourage help if needed. Sometimes the conversation is all that's required. It is not up to you to solve these issues. Sometimes you're not the professional. You can have the conversation, and then the idea is if that's enough, then that's great, or there's something that you can do in the maybe it's a concern around work, maybe there is something you can do. Obviously, yes, do that, as long as it's not a burden. But encourage to get help. It's not on you to solve this. You've had the conversation, you've given the gift of that, you're going to be there walking beside them, but encourage the right help. And the right help might be EAP in a work conversation, in a context. It could be a GP. Now, remembering that one of the symptoms of people of distress is feeling frozen. So sometimes what you can do is help them get to the appointment or even make the appointment for them. But I want you to be really clear with these conversations that this is not something that you need to be taking on to solve yourself, or otherwise it's just too much. This isn't for you to carry. It's for you to help and be the support. It's not for you to fix or solve. And that at the end of that care, that CARE, then you're to look after yourself. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's the approach that we have. Tell me a little bit about the way that you approach it, Allan.
Oh my gosh, that was incredible. I can't follow that. That's great. I'm going to borrow that model. So I'm going to stick that on a t-shirt. I think that's incredible. Care is the model. All I wanted to add there is what you said was so critical: listening without judgment. Listening without judgment. And I know how tricky it is at times to even approach the conversation. And I think you gave some really sage advice there. But if I could just add to it, and that's just when you listen without judgment, you're empathically connecting with someone. And one of the signs in ourselves that we know we're not listening without judgment, and I bet there'll be a few people that might be thinking this now because I'm one of them, is when you start to think about other things when people are talking to you. What do I say next? Or I've really got that important deadline right now. Oh my gosh, I haven't had coffee yet, or what that boss said to me. You start to kind of get distracted and you wander off, or it could look like interrupting. So when you interrupt someone, really what you're doing is you're saying them, what I'm saying is more important than what I need to say is more important than what you're saying right now. I don't have time for your opinion, or this isn't a conversation that I'm wanting to deal with. It's a contest. I'm going to win this. So we need to really pay attention to when we have those conversations, and it's not something that just comes naturally. We have to practice it. And so when the questioner asks that question, it's such an important question to ask, because we've got to have cultures that accept this too. So we can be really good individually and we can reach out, but if we want mass scale, and if we want to effectively, what the work that I'm in, and I know that Groove is in, is that's preventing illness, injury, preventing violence and abuse and disrespect. But we're in that notion of prevention, so we need macro scale to this. So we need to ensure that our systems, our structures, so policies, practices, and our culture are also supportive of the notion of this operating rhythm, this check-in or a care framework. And we've got to make sure that the people around us, particularly management and leaders, are role modeling that. Because if psychological safety is not established as a core principle in the workplace, if well-being is not seen as an investment, it's not a cost, it's an investment to society, but also your employees. But if we're not seeing that role model through our leaders, then we are not going to see the scale and the sustainability that we require to ensure that we are preventing more injury, more abuse, and more disrespect.
Oh, very, very well said. And when you talk about psychological safety, I think that one of the things that we can do in workplaces is to make sure that it's okay to be me in the workplaces that we're in. So part of Michael says, look, a critical reason here is trust. And so to create a working environment, if we're talking about a work context, is we won't be getting the answers if people don't feel able to disclose because they don't trust the people that are asking the question. And we might be very well-meaning. We might rock up and say, are you okay? But we haven't created an environment as leaders where people actually feel like it is okay to tell you what's going on for them because it's not safe, or they're worried about repercussions within the workplace. So it's very important that Mental health is discussed without stigma. There are definitely very strong policies around that, and that it is actually modeled where those checking in, we can see that actually it's genuine curiosity and we genuinely care. And if you do tell us, we are not then going to say, well, that's it, you're out the door, because we don't think that you're robust or resilient enough. So there are a lot of concerns that people have, and they're legitimate concerns about what happens if I do disclose, particularly in the context of work. And creating a psychologically safe environment is the key. And that is about, it is safe to be me, it's safe to raise concerns, and it's safe to talk about mental health. And so from a White Ribbon Australia point of view, I know that inclusivity is part of that, making sure that you foster a sense of belonging and actually not just talk about diversity, but actually live and breathe the idea that diversity is a good thing. It's okay to, like, having a diverse workforce is one thing, creating a sense of belonging is another. So how do you do that? How are you doing the inclusivity thing?
Well, we got to look at what you were saying there with policies and practices and procedures. We must establish that as a core, but that's very kind of mechanical and technical. Inclusion in practice also looks at respecting individuals, and I love that it's okay to be me, but it's also what we need to do as society is respect and embrace the diversity that's around us. And in order to do that appropriately, we need to look at the nuances of that, because diversity in itself, it's not a homogenous term. Diversity is multi-layered. It's different for different individuals. So I'm a really proud rainbow community member. I'm a gay male, and I know that for my community and for me to feel safe in the workplace, it's going to look a lot differently for other levels of diversity. So whether or not that I'm a person living with a disability, or I'm a woman, or I come from a multicultural background, diversity has to look a little differently, and what's required is, of course, needs to be developed in partnership and have a fingerprint with that lived experience of that diversity, whatever we want to focus on. But it really comes back to the understanding and being really proud and showing pride in the fact that we are not all born the same way, and that there is not a stereotype to live up to. There, we need to challenge those stereotypes. We need to look at power and control as well. As a society, we need to look at who's got that power and who hasn't, and why is that the case. We've got to be really curious around that, because we can do really, really good practices in certain environments, so at home, with our friendship group, at work. But unless we're building a society where we are transient, and I love that, what you talked about, Fiona, because we are transient through different settings. So I know in a 24-hour day, we're doing lots of different things, and I'll come into many different setting environments. And that requires a certain maybe attitudinal behavioral changes that subconsciously that we all do. And I wanted to give you a point. So there are still some times for me when I go to the gym, and I'm a really proud gay male. I'm so proud of it. Like I march in pride. I love my community. I'm not ashamed of it anymore. And there was a time when I was a kid trying to figure it out, that there was a lot of shame and trauma. But even so, like yesterday when I went to the gym, for some reason I was visited by that thought of, I need to act masculine. And I still catch myself with that. And it's that environment that's so fascinating that is conducive to that. And so, but then at work, I would never think that. I wouldn't walk through the workplace door and say, I've got to be masculine right now. What does that even mean? And then I catch myself in that thought and reflection, and I'm like, my gosh, Allan, what are you thinking? But it's because there are certain reinforcers in society that still uphold certain notions, which really decay and dilute that notion of diversity. So as all of us, I think the homework that we've got to do, and I know we're talking about are you okay, and those micro conversations in that exchange or in a workplace, but I think as a society, we've got to lift this. We've got to lift the conversation to understand what is actually driving discrimination, what is driving inequality, or what is driving diversity in some settings not to thrive. And I think it's there that we'll find answers together, and we are better together, but action is going to be foundational if we're going to really succeed in ensuring that places like work sites are inclusive and diverse.
Yeah, and it comes back to what Michael was saying. You can't disclose if there is no trust. And creating an environment where diversity is promoted and embraced is part of that journey, because people within our organizations are not going to be okay if we pay lip service to these things, if we are not understanding that, if we embrace our differences, we'll end up being better at work and at home. As the mother of rainbow kids, two of whom live in the United States, there are things that are happening in the world right now, which will mean that some people right now do not feel okay. There are some really rubbish things that are going on. I'm a woman of a certain age, and I can see what's going on around the world. And I marched in the 80s, and so there are some reasons why that people may not be feeling okay. And so giving people the platform sometimes to be able to process how they're feeling, because I think that there's been a lot of grief over the last couple of years around COVID. A lot of younger people who had some plans that have been kiboshed. There's so many layers of stress and anxiety that's going on right now, and they're all legitimate feelings. And the reality is that if we don't put voice to the things that we are feeling, what happens from a psychological point of view is that we start burying it, and it might start manifesting in terms of physical ill health. Sometimes these things can manifest in different ways. So one of the things that we need to do is make it open. Why are you okay? I'm so excited by it. I've got chills. I'm so excited. It's that it will open conversations to allow people to understand that how they feel is okay. And if we want to bring solutions, we want to get to those solutions, we have to have the conversation and give people the space to go, maybe I'm not okay right now. And maybe I am feeling this because it may not even be about anything other than the world right now is overwhelming. So that is okay. It's okay to have the okay conversation. Thank you, Allan. I'm feeling really impassioned now.
I can feel it. And I know you're on the other side of the country. So,
I think that from a scientific point of view, we know that when we start to think, what these conversations are about, thinking. And if we want to, we've got solutions to a whole lot of things that we need to start coming up with, right? We're confronted with some political landscapes that are challenging, some environmental challenges when we're thinking about things like climate change. I look at Gen Zs who have some pressures on them that I didn't have as a Gen X. And so we have to start thinking and understanding that if we are going to start problem solving right now, it starts with talking, reaching out to each other, creating trust and listening. And that comes to, if I understand what's going on for you, you just told me something I didn't know about you, Allan, that you went to the gym and you suddenly had all of that past stuff, because we are a product of our past. If we don't acknowledge that, we can't move on from it. So understanding that I'm a white woman of a certain age, I would have been, that I will have unconscious biases and maybe conscious biases that unless I start discussing and thinking about, I am going to start to create damage in the world, because it's a different world. So this is about, Are You Okay? Is about mental health and mental well-being, and being able to understand that feeling crappy about right now is fine. Actually, I would be surprised if everyone on this call doesn't have a moment in the last week, certainly in the last year, where they didn't feel absolutely rubbish, because that is actually a normal thing right now, because it's been a bit rubbish. Having a way to process it, having a way to think about solutions, having a way just to be open and honest, even maybe to share a tear, those are good things, right? And that comes back to one of the keys to well-being generally is connection.
Absolutely. And can I just add in there, my grandmother always gives me some really good advice. And I remember she was saying to me, create healthy habits, not restrictions, Allan. Create healthy habits, not restrictions. And my nan should have written a book. She was too wise beyond her years. She was an incredible lady. So so that's one thing that that lives with me a lot of the time. So create those healthy habits. Don't put restrictions in place for yourself.
And that really brings us to the heart of what Groove is. Groove is about doing small daily actions. And you talked about your do one thing, Allan, that you did today, which was was it oat milk latte, but taking some time
and
for yourself. And and being in the moment. So while we start to think about the people around us and try to have those care conversations and reach out to the people that we're concerned about, or even just the people that we love, finding out are you okay? I ask it of my children all the time, and they're okay. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes I hear there are good things about having that conversation, making that part of the rhythms, operational rhythms. I really like that. But also understand that if you are going to be having those conversations, what I would love everyone here to be doing is looking after you. Because the oxygen mask that you're talking about is that if it is a tougher time right now, let's be honest, there are some things that are challenging that are happening in the world. So that oxygen mask is really important. So taking some time, your mindful moment, taking moments in the day just to look forward to something or do something you enjoy, even when life feels chaotic, is important for protection. So we are complex human beings. You can feel really upset about things and at the same time have a good laugh. You know, we can have moments in the day because that's part of being a human being. And I do recommend Jane Goodall's book around keeping hope. Because one of the things that you can feel right now is if you are feeling overwhelmed is that there is also hope. The human beings are incredible. Through all of this, we have solved some things. I'm quite old. We never knew that the Berlin Wall would come down. I lived through the Cold War. And so there was a lot of narrative when I was growing up that I never thought that in the 90s I would see what happened happen. So there are reasons for hope. And part of keeping hope is making sure that you're looking after yourself, that you're spending some time, even if you are feeling that things are rubbish, and allowing yourself to have those moments when you feel rubbish, because feeling rubbish is fine as well. We are complicated and we are not just one thing or another. So tell me, Allan, what are you looking forward to right now? I want to know what you're going to be doing to look after yourself.
Right now, I am going to, in this moment, I'm going to be around really good people, and we're going to have a really good chat today. We're talking about some really important stuff around the future planning. And my motto is you need someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. And so maybe what I'm going to do right now is to think about those things. I know I love my husband and my gorgeous daughter. I know that I've got something to do. I love this job of building a social movement around ending violence and disrespect against women and working with an amazing ally such as Groove. And I've got something to look forward to. And I actually am looking forward to, I'm going home and I'm going to be in my own bed. And I know that sounds really silly, but for anyone out there, please tell me, like hotel pillows, nothing like your own hotel, like your bed pillow. And I'm going to reveal a little secret for those that stayed on the webinar for the longest period of time. I'm looking forward to the moment that I get to eat my vegan meal on the plane. There's something about plane food that just comes to it that brings me back to year 6 camp. I just love the compactness of it. So I'm looking forward to those little moments. But really, one thing is, Fiona, I just absolutely appreciate your wisdom and your generosity in sharing your frameworks. And the sound bites, it's okay to be me, it's ringing in my head for some reason. So I'm going to park that because I need to come back to that to understand, okay, what was that about? Because Fiona, you're just incredibly generous with your time and just your knowledge. So I've just absolutely enjoyed the conversation today.
I've obviously loved it because I've gone over time. I'm sorry, people. I hadn't realized it. I love speaking with Allan so much. So, so much love to everyone who joined us. Please, I hope that you are okay. I've enjoyed myself so much. And as always, it was a total pleasure. Thanks for joining us. We'll be doing some more sessions. And are you okay? Do something for you and look forward to something tonight and take tiny moments for yourself. Much love.
See you later.
Ka kite.